You know, there's this massive, almost invisible river of stuff flowing across the US-Canada border every single day. But back in 2025, it wasn't cars or lumber that kicked off a huge international trade war. No, it was something way less glamorous, and it put a decades-long alliance totally on the rocks.
So first, just look at this number, 3.46 million tons. To put that into perspective for you, that's like the weight of 500,000 adult elephants. I mean, that is a truly colossal figure, and it's right at the heart of this whole story.
So what is this mystery commodity? What on earth could the Canadian province of Ontario be sending to its American neighbor in such insane quantities? Well, the answer might just surprise you.
Yeah, garbage. That's right. Millions of tons of municipal solid waste trucked across the border every single year. And this is where our story really gets going.
And look, this isn't just some simple disposal deal. We're talking about a deeply entrenched economic and, environmental relationship that's built on a literal river of trash.
And the scale here, it's just immense. I mean, sure, other states send some waste to Michigan, but Canada, they are by far the single biggest source of imported trash. We're talking over 14% of everything that gets buried in Michigan's landfills.
And for Ontario, you gotta understand, this isn't just about convenience, it's an absolute necessity. The province is critically dependent on US landfills, exporting more than a quarter of its total waste. And that dependency, that's the vulnerability that turned a local issue into a massive geopolitical flashpoint.
So, faced with this, mountain of Canadian waste, Michigan decided it was time to do something. Governor Gretchen Whitmer tried to solve the problem with what seemed like a pretty simple domestic policy.
The plan was pretty straightforward. Drastically raise the state's tipping fee, that's basically the tax for dumping a ton of waste, from a measly 36 cents all the way up to $5. That's almost a 1,300% increase. The logic seems simple, right? Make it so expensive that Canada would have to think twice about using Michigan as its dumping ground.
Okay, so that brings us to the obvious question, right? Why not just slap a higher fee specifically on Canadian trash? Well, the answer gets tangled up in a really tricky but powerful piece of U.S. constitutional law.
It's called the Dormant Commerce Clause. And what it does in a nutshell is it stops individual states from making their own trade rules that mess with commerce between states or with other countries.
And here's the kicker, and this is a legal twist you probably wouldn't expect. The Supreme Court has actually ruled that garbage is an article of commerce, legally speaking, just like cars or corn. So what does that mean? It means Michigan can't just single out Canadian trash. Any fee hike has to apply to everybody, equally. And just like that, an environmental policy becomes a politically toxic trash tax on Michigan's own citizens.
So, with Michigan's plan basically stalled, the federal government suddenly jumps into the ring. And what was a regional headache, almost overnight becomes a full-blown international crisis.
So on February 1st, 2025, the Trump administration pulls out a big gun, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Now, this is a law that's usually for, national security crises, and they use it to slap a blanket 25% tariff on all Canadian goods. And yeah, that included waste. Well, that move was challenged immediately, and by February 2026, the Supreme Court had struck it down, but not before it sent a massive shockwave through the entire system.
Okay, so to really get why that tariff was so devastating, we have to look at Ontario's own internal crisis. And believe me, this was not a new problem. I mean, look at this quote from Ontario's Auditor General. Officials had been sounding the alarm for years that the province just wasn't prepared for this.
And that lack of preparation has created this slow-motion, almost existential threat for Ontario. It's a problem that experts have started calling the waste cliff.
And this really gets to the heart of it. See, Ontario isn't just shipping its trash away for convenience. It's literally, and I mean literally, running out of space. Every single year, the garbage piles up higher, pushing the province closer and closer to a breaking point.
So let's put some numbers on this timeline. Okay, so best case scenario, right? The border to Michigan stays wide open. Even then, Ontario's own landfills are projected to be totally full somewhere between 2032 and 2035. That's not that far away. But what happens if that border suddenly slams shut?
And this is where things go from bad to catastrophic. If that river of trash suddenly gets blocked, which is basically what that 25% tariff did, the whole timeline just speeds up like crazy. The waste cliff could arrive as early as 2029. Ontario would, quite literally, be drowning in its own garbage.
So eventually the legal system stepped in and acted like a release valve, ending the immediate trade war. But, and this is a big but, it did absolutely nothing to solve the actual problem underneath.
The big moment came on February 20th, 2026. That's when the Supreme Court handed down its verdict, finally settling the question of whether a president could use these emergency powers to just create tariffs like that.
And the ruling? It couldn't have been clearer. The court just said it plainly. IEPPA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. And with that one sentence, the entire legal basis for this trash war just evaporated.
So what happened right away? Well, everything just snapped back to the way it was. The 25% tariff disappeared, and those trucks full of Ontario's garbage started rolling across the border into Michigan again.
Which, of course, leaves us with one big, lingering question. The Supreme Court might have ended the battle, but those fundamental problems, Michigan's super low fees and Ontario's looming waste cliff, they're still there, totally unresolved. So is the trash war really over? Or are we just living in a very, very fragile truce?